Hey everyone, today I want to examine the validity of the New Testament's New Covenant. Shalom everybody, and welcome to Beit Tefillah Basics. Christianity is absolutely certain that their New Testament Messiah has them under a brand new covenant today, as they think that the old covenant of the Old Testament was made null and void by their Messiah. Whether it's due mainly to tradition, bad teachings, or just the plain fact that people don't or won't research this, we can do a simple study and become absolutely certain that no, we are not under any kind of new covenant. So how is it that most people in churchianity think we are under a new covenant today? Mainly because their New Testament tells them specifically that they are. Maybe due to the fact that a lot call the New Testament the Brit Hadashah, which translated from Hebrew means New Covenant. Well, for starters, let's take note that the New Testament was originally written in Greek, not Hebrew. So it was never called or referred to as the Brit Hadashah. That's a modern invention by the Hebrew Roots movement. And you'd think that for all the emphasis that this New Testament put on its new covenant, that somewhere in the Old Testament we'd have been told about it. Well, there's only one single place that the phrase New Covenant is used in the Old Testament. So let's read that. It's in Jeremiah 31:31. Behold, the days come, says Yehovah, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Yisra'el and with the house of Judah. That's it. That's the only time. But let's continue to read on in Jeremiah and see what it says will happen when this new covenant takes effect, to see how accurate the New Testament is in portraying one. Shall we? Jeremiah 31:32-34. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yehovah. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Yisrael after those days, declares Yehovah. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. And I shall be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall they teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know Yehovah, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yehovah. For I shall forgive their crookedness and remember their sin no more. So let's go ahead and examine the last part of the passage, because clearly this new covenant takes place in the future, and we'll see why. And no longer shall they teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know Yehovah, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I shall forgive their crookedness and remember their sin no more. So regarding that passage, let's ask these questions. Does anyone today still need to teach the Torah? Yes. It says, and no longer shall they teach each one to his neighbor and each one to his brother, because they're all going to know it. It's going to be written on their hearts. Does everyone today know Yehovah from the least to the greatest? No. Has all of the sin been forgiven yet? No. So clearly, this is speaking of a future time in the next life or in God's eternal kingdom when we're placed back on the new earth. It appears that there will be a brand new covenant at that time. Did you also hear anything in hearing that passage about a New Testament Messiah putting anyone under that covenant? No. But Messianic Christians or New Testament believers think that their Messiah instituted a new covenant, which he did in his blood. They're probably thinking of the part in the New Testament where the Messiah holds up the cup saying, This is the new covenant in my blood. But there's some big problems with that. First of all, human blood was never used to ratify a covenant with God. Never. It's a sin to drink any kind of blood, even animals' blood, so to try and spiritualize the drinking of blood to be part of a covenant is nothing more than a pagan practice where drinking the blood they think gave you life. That's why God forbids it. God never told us anything about sending some kind of Messiah as portrayed in the New Testament. Nowhere. God gave us his covenant in his word, in his Torah, and said not to add to it or subtract from it, which is what the New Testament's idea of a new covenant would do in many, many ways. Let's look at it like this. A covenant is like a contract. There's a list of terms to it, which each party agrees to do. In the Torah, there's a list of terms, which we know as commandments, that God said we are to keep if we wish to be considered his people. Then he will gather us. Remember, he said, if you do this, then I will be your God and you will be my people. So it's what we're going to do and what he's going to do, that he's going to gather us and put it back on the land, and we're going to be with him for eternity. There are no terms to a second or a brand new covenant listed anywhere in the New Testament. The only covenant terms we have is in the Old Testament in the Torah. If there was a new covenant issued, there would be terms and conditions listed in the New Testament, of which there aren't any. And since God said we can't add or subtract from his word, then some kind of covenant set up under a New Testament Messiah would 100% violate the Torah anyway, which is what sin is, and would be leading people further away from God. And simply believing in something does not a covenant make. God gave one covenant to Abraham and to his seed, no other group of people. And why did God give the covenant and promises to Abraham? Well, God told Abraham's son Isaac this in Genesis 26:5, because Abraham obeyed my voice and guarded my charge, my commands, my laws, and my Torah. All that Abraham kept and obeyed, we are to keep and obey as well, to be considered his seed and to be part of the only covenant ever given by our Creator, if we wish to become his people. You know, another good video to watch is this one I did a while back entitled Messianic Age versus the New Testament Messiah. It has some similar points on it, and it expounds even further on some things that the New Testament claims that its Messiah enacted or fulfilled, yet they're completely without merit. I will add a link to that video below in the description. It's not a basics video, but it's pretty easy to see that these things are false when we hold them up to the Word of God. So let's read one more time the only place in the Old Testament that a new covenant was ever prophesied. One more time in Jeremiah 31:31-34. Behold, the days come, says Yehovah, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Yisrael and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yehovah. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Yisrael after those days, declares Yehovah. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. And I shall be their God, and they shall be my people, and no longer shall they teach, each one to his neighbor and each one to his brother, saying, Know Yehovah, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yehovah. For I forgive their crookedness and remember their sin no more. Now, as we read that, we can take note of a few things. First of all, the new covenant is with the house of Yisrael and with the house of Judah, not with Christians, okay? It's with his people. You read Ezekiel 37 about the two sticks becoming one in his hand, same thing. It's the two houses coming together, Judah and Yisrael. Okay? And he says, I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. That doesn't mean so we can forget about it. It's going to be written on our hearts. So we're all going to know it. No one's going to need to teach it because we're going to be living it and breathing it and loving it. And that's what we have to practice today. If we want to be his people, we need to start living like it now. Start loving the Torah. Start living it. That's what he's wanting to see, right? Is obedience. It's the only test we're ever going to get in life is if we obey his Torah or if we don't. Okay? But as we read that, we can see that there's absolutely zero mention of any kind of New Testament Messiah that will be needed for this to happen. Not at all. God says that he's going to forgive the sin. No New Testament mediator or blood of a New Testament Messiah is needed for any type of sin forgiveness. Nowhere in the Old Testament. It's not only never mentioned here, but that would be completely against the Torah as well. And as for who God will bring into his kingdom and into his house of prayer someday, he stated this in Isaiah 56:6. Also the sons of the stranger that join themselves to Yehovah to serve him and to love the name of Yehovah to be his servants, everyone that keeps the Sabbath from polluting it and takes hold of my covenant. The bottom line is we are all to be under that same covenant that God gave his people so long ago. One covenant with one set of rules for all who wish to be God's people. The new covenant is coming. And the sooner the better as far as I'm concerned, because this world is nuts. But anyway, that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching, everyone, and being a part of Beit Tefillah. Please sub to the channel if you haven't done so yet, and give the video a thumbs up as it helps out a lot. And shalom to all who are in the dispersion that are doing their very best to obey the Word of God. Everybody be blessed and have a wonderful day.